As to the arrangement of the parts of the universe, I hold the sun to be situated motionless in the center of the revolution of the celestial orbs, while the earth revolves about the sun. They know also that I support this position not only by refuting the arguments of Ptolemy and Aristotle, but by producing many counter arguments. So their basic statement of what caused all the ruckus, what caused all the distress, that the sun is situated motionless in the center of the revolution of the celestial orbs while the earth revolves about the sun. I mean, it's pretty amazing. Not quite right, as we know now. The sun is not motionless. It is not at the center of. There are no celestial orbs, at least in the sense that they used to think there were. I mean, we're getting deep into ancient pre-modern cosmology here, and that's what's at issue. Galileo was not the first person, by any means, in history, to say that the Earth revolved around the sun rather than the sun and everything else revolving around the Earth. But it was always a minority opinion in ancient Greece and the other great ancient civilizations. The supposition was, except for a few people who thought otherwise, but were not widely listened to, that the Earth was the center of the universe, whatever the universe was. And the thing about that is it looks that way. That is, if we look at the sky and we trace the motions of the stars, the moon, the planets, if we look most obviously at the sun, we still say that the sun rises and sets. It sure looks like things are moving around us. The complications come when we try to actually mathematically describe those movements and realize that it doesn't quite fit. But it wasn't until the 16th century, I think it was 1560 something, that Copernicus, the first modern astronomer you could say, because he's the one who said, that it's a lot easier to explain the movements of the heavenly bodies in the sky by taking the opposite hypothesis, to say that it's the Earth that's in motion around the sun, and that is probably true, and of course it is true. Galileo's writing this, I don't know, 50 years after Copernicus, but the idea is still quite new. He refers to some earlier things that he discovered having to do with the moon, having to do with I think Jupiter having moons, other planets having moons, and things like that, which were real important astronomical discoveries. And he was the first one, as far as I know, to use telescope to actually look at the heavenly bodies in any kind of systematic way. But to say this, that again, it's not quite right, because we have a more sophisticated view of astronomy than Galileo did. But to say this, that the Earth is in motion around the sun, was a revolutionary thing to say, and it upset a lot of people. And it was a subversive idea. I mean, it takes perhaps a certain amount of imagination to think that a simple astronomical observation or an astronomical hypothesis could be subversive. But it was. It was subversive of traditional belief. And the two thinkers that he mentions, Ptolemy and Aristotle. Aristotle was Aristotle, the great ancient philosopher who talked about everything, mostly philosophy, as far as I'm concerned, metaphysics, ethics, political philosophy, but he was also a scientist of a sort. So they talked about astronomy, and Ptolemy, perhaps more important, because Ptolemy was an ancient astronomer who engaged in the great project of what was called saving the appearances. That is, it does appear that the sun revolves around the Earth, and it does appear that the planets and the stars revolve around the Earth. But mathematically, it doesn't really work out. There are certain complications that you know don't fit into that hypothesis. That is the hypothesis that the Earth is stationary and that everything else in the universe moves around it in perfect circles is something that actually doesn't quite work out mathematically. And Ptolemy was a mathematical genius who came up with a mathematical account of how it could be that the sun and the stars, and especially the planets, could be said to revolve around the Earth in perfect circles with some ingenious things that he developed. So these thinkers, Ptolemy and Aristotle, and the thinkers of the ancient world of Greece and Rome, basically, and then of course the church writers, people like Augustine and Anselm and Thomas Aquinas and dozens and dozens of others, they had great authority. So for Galileo to insist on something that kind of went against all that was very revolutionary and was seen as subversive. And as we see, it's the weight of the authority of thinkers like Aristotle and Ptolemy that he was coming up against. But it also was the weight of religion. The notion that the Earth was at the center of the universe was meant to be, was connected in people's minds with the idea that we, human beings, are the center of the universe. We are God's special creation. And that our place in the universe, we're stationary on the Earth and everything else is revolving around us. It's really meant to be indicative of our special relationship with God. So someone who's saying that the Earth is in motion around the sun is perhaps seen as trying to subvert that view, that traditional view, that view that human beings occupy a special place in the physical universe that's indicative of their special place in the plan of God, of providence.